Fellow tennis nerds, I hope all is well. Today I have Dan Wolken, an award-winning columnist for USA Today. He's been covering sports for more than 2 decades. He's also a dedicated tennis player, and he's heading out to the Open after our call here. But we're going to talk about Cocomania today, his first book. But first of all, how are you today, Dan?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate you inviting me. And yeah, glad to be with another tennis nerd.
Yeah, that's great. So, how did you get the idea of writing this book?
Well, actually, the publishing company approached me last year, shortly after Coco won the US Open, and wanted to do a book that was going to sort of capture, this rising young American superstar that is really popular and obviously a lot of tremendously interesting things that she's had in her life and her career already, even though she's just 20 years old. And they wanted me to get it done pretty quick. So actually started the process, honestly, just maybe a month after the U.S. Open ended last year, and wrapped up the manuscript relatively quickly. And yeah, we've been working on it ever since to release it right around the time of her U.S. Open defense.
Yeah, which started positively yesterday. She lost only 2 games, so I think it's a good start. She has a lot of pressure on her, obviously. How different is the challenge to write a book instead of like the regular column or like being, then you have to kind of go in a cabin in the woods or something. What was your process there?
Well, so for me, I actually had three challenges for writing this book. One is, yes, I've never been through the book writing process before, so that was one. And interesting to just get a sense of the workflow. And, I kind of, the way I did it was, hey, I needed to get X amount done each day so that I wasn't sort of rushing through it at the end. The second challenge was to write it in the voice for young adults, because that's really the target audience for this book. I write for a newspaper, which is a kind of writing that I'm used to. And yet, when you want to do things that would interest younger audiences, you do have to change not only the tone of your writing. I think you try to make it maybe a little more simple, and also be very mindful of the fact that a lot of younger people who might be interested in this book or might be interested in Coco don't really understand tennis very well. And so a lot of the book, I think, is not just about her, it's about the sport of tennis itself. And because I do think one of the hard things to get people interested in tennis, just generally, especially young people, is that it can be sort of complicated to follow. The four Grand Slams and why they're different, and why there are 2 weeks, and why men play best of five when they don't on the regular tour, and so all of these other things. And why is it in the United States 1 week and Europe the next, and all that stuff. So tried to break all that down, a sense of history of the sport. And then the third challenge for me, frankly, uh, was the fact that I was writing it in the middle of the college football season in the United States, which is one of the main things that I focus on during any year. So I was trying to manage all of those at once, and but it was fun. I was very happy with how it came out in the end, and I do think it's a book that a lot of young kids would enjoy, even if they don't necessarily like tennis, because I think there's a lot of good lessons in there that frankly came from how she won that U.S. Open title last year.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You get media reports now saying for a while, and people use this kind of quote like tennis viewership is down, growth of pickleball, and so what do you think the state of tennis is in the country? I mean, at the same time, we're seeing like I guess audience numbers at the U.S. Open, like it takes like 30 minutes to get a hot dog because people are so invested in going there. So I think there's like two stories to that. What's your take on tennis, the health of tennis?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do think you're right in the sense that the interest when you go to a Grand Slam is palpable. The U.S. Open. I mean, you go to Wimbledon, and there's a lot of Americans who you would find in the queue, and so people are spending money and making the effort to go to these amazing tournaments. At the same time, like just as an example, I live in Atlanta, which is an amazing tennis playing market in the United States. I think some statistics, and I don't know how reliable these are, say that it's got the highest percentage of tennis players of any major urban area in the United States. Yet at the same time, like the Atlanta Open 250 is an event that really was struggling to sustain itself, and yet um, you'd see a lot of people from Atlanta would get up onto an airplane and spend a lot of money to go to the U.S. Open, but maybe wouldn't spend $100 to go get a couple sessions of tickets worth for the Atlanta Open. Now there's all kinds of mitigating circumstances and reasons. It's a tough time of year in this calendar, and um, the heat and all that stuff. You weren't getting the best players. It was only kind of Francis and Nick Kyrgios and maybe a couple other guys. So all that stuff is valid, but at the same time, it follows the trend of fewer tournaments in the United States. The Atlanta Open is done. There's not going to be another one. So we're seeing this trend of how many big tournaments do we have anymore in the United States? It's just a handful. So I think that's a big problem, and I understand the game's more global. Um, so but the interest is there. I saw it during the Olympics. I thought the fan interest in the U.S. was really high. Um, playing is a different story. I think certainly where I live, there's still a lot of players, still people who want to play, and the courts are still full. At the same time, as a tennis player myself, I have to recognize that it's a tough sport. It's a hard sport. If you want to just start from scratch, you're going to stink for a long time playing tennis. And it's also really hard, physically. And as you get older, it, may not be your cup of tea. So I get why people are gravitating toward pickleball in some ways as a recreational sport, because the barrier to entry is much lower.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, the thing with tennis and the beauty of it is that it's difficult and it's demanding, right? And then you might be
Yeah.
into that or you might not be, depending on your time investment, because you need to invest some time in tennis. Like it feels like a sport that it helps if you started early, right? And have the technique. As what's your own tennis journey in this
Yeah.
game?
So yeah, exactly. Like, so I played growing up. I was fortunate enough growing up. I grew up in Arkansas, kind of a small, relatively small town in Arkansas. But I was uh, living in a neighborhood where we had a tennis club, and I had access to that. And at a very young age, I got to be in tennis lessons. So, I had some basic fundamental technique and understanding of how to play. And I did play a lot growing up. And then I drifted away from it and I got to college just because I was busy and, trying to start my career and all that stuff. And, for the first part of my career, I was, I was traveling all the time. I was living in New York for a period, and trying to do any sort of recreational sport as a resident of New York is difficult, just because access is tough. So I kind of stopped playing tennis at all for over a decade, really. And then when I moved to Atlanta in 2012, um, I started to get curious about it again, and it was a little more established in my career and my schedule and my time management. And so I sort of gradually, got back in it. And then I really sort of, 2016, 2017, decided that I was going to really sort of give it, my full attention. And, yeah, so since then I've been playing, um, as much as I can. I mean, sometimes, I'll play 5 times a week, local leagues, local tournaments, that kind of stuff. So, unfortunately, right now I'm sort of just at the end of a fairly major injury. So, I'm hoping after the Open next couple weeks, I'll be getting back on the court and starting to hit balls again. But yeah, I mean, it's just as an adult, it's actually great to get back into it at this stage of my life, because I'm still healthy enough. Despite the last few months, I'm still healthy enough to be competitive and to play well, and to take it pretty seriously. But I also haven't overplayed through the course of my life where I don't have the passion for it anymore. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a I think a familiar story. I think a lot of people leave tennis. It also happened to myself, right? Like you leave tennis due to other sports or family interest or whatever happens in your life, and then when you get back, it's stronger than ever. Like you're feeling like now you're more passionate about it. You maybe appreciate it more. But obviously, as you said, you can get injured, and people do get injured, and it's a bit of a struggle to get back. But it's like once you get that second wind going, I think it's tough to give it up. That's what I've seen a lot with other people.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, injuries are no fun. I mean, June 15th, I was playing actually in a tournament, and um, just took a bad step and my ankle just turned over, and then you go to the doctor and they say, yeah, you're probably going to be out for 10, 11, 12 weeks. And it's not a lot of fun to hear. And at my age, I'm 44 years old. Those kinds of things are tougher to come back from. But actually, you know what? In some ways, it's a blessing because it continually gives you a goal. It makes you not lazy. I think to understand that I've got to be at a certain baseline level of fitness to be able to play tennis the way I want to play. And I think as you get older, even with the injury risk, I actually think that's something that over the long haul uh, helps you live a more healthy lifestyle through your 40s, 50s, 60s, and however long you want to play.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's the same here. I play like 5, 6 times a week as well, and it's like if it forces you to maintain and do the in between workouts as well, because otherwise you're gonna get injured, or it's gonna get
Yeah.
like more draining to play. So it's for that preparation. Just to play tennis, you need to to work out. That's funny.
Yeah, and what's great is, and for me, especially living in a city where there's just so many players at all levels, you end up on the court with people who are 15 to 20 years younger than you, who you feel like you are better than, and you can actually be more physically fit than, uh, outlast in a grinding endurance match, and then you play 65 and 70 year olds who you're like, how is this guy this good at that age, and how is he running around the court? And that's the beauty of tennis. I think at the amateur level is it connects you with so many people of different ages and classes and professions. You're one day I'm playing with an airline pilot, and the next a doctor, and the next a teacher, and that's the cool thing about it. And I just don't think there's that many sports that exist that way that you can really play your whole life. So I'm a big advocate for it.
Yeah, I 100% agree to everything you said there. So, how much, if you go back to the age, like she broke through Coco at a
Yeah.
really young age, and now she has like one Grand Slam, huge pressure. She's seen that by reading the book, you learn more about her, right? And it feels like the pressure was always there, like really early on. How much do you think that affects her and the family? And how big do you think her potential is as kind of being a legend in the game, kind of like Serena, her big idol?
So yeah, someone like Coco, I think, exists in an environment that very few people, even very few great tennis players, can relate to, which is that she was identified literally from 7, 8 years old as somebody who, all right, we need to pay attention to her, and her family pretty much rearranged their entire lives in order to accommodate what was going to be best for her training, for her development, to get her with the right coaches. So, a lot of people in tennis sort of, they have to grind their way into the position to get on tour, to become a professional. And it takes them, in these very weird directions. I think hers was somewhat straightforward in the sense that, all right, her father said, all right, we want you to play tennis. She fell in love with it. She decided this is what she wanted to be, like literally before she probably even understood what that was going to mean fully for her life. And then everything around her was set up to give her that chance. And so, what is that pressure like when literally your family has kind of just oriented everything toward tennis success? I think that can be an unhealthy thing, but they have managed as a family, I think, to do it in a way that took the pressure off of her, that gave her a much better balance in her life, and in a sense of understanding that that yeah, this is important, but there's also other things that matter in life. And so, a lot of tennis kids who come up through, through the academies, through these types of tracks, don't have that, and they end up becoming, lose all perspective, and then, they either burn out or become bitter or very selfish. She's the rare one who's managed to, I think, really kind of maintain some sense of normalcy in her life, which I think is a great credit to her parents, Candy and Corey. And like, even a thing I talk about in the book where they send her to Mortoglu Academy. Mortoglu, brings her over, gives her a tryout for this essentially a scholarship program to train at the academy, because they didn't have the means to pay for that kind of coaching. And, he immediately recognizes, like, this girl's got something. She needs to come here. And they arrange it to where she only spends part of the year there, and that she can spend another part of the year at home in Florida with her family, with her friends. And they are sending a coach from Mortoglu to be with her, to manage her development from the United States. So those are the kinds of things that I just think, like, they're little things in the big picture of where she's going to be as a tennis player. But I think they got all of it right every step of the way. And then you see it culminate sort of at age 15, where she goes to Wimbledon and beats Venus Williams. And then all of a sudden, life really changes.
Yeah, the 2019 match, yeah, there was like 30. I think Venus was 39, and Coco was like 15 years old. So it was like a
Yeah.
crazy, like a clash of the generations there, like similar to what Fed had with Sampras, when like they were kind of the passing of the baton in tennis. So that was an iconic match. So how do you think she can keep dealing with it? Now she's established. She's 3 in the world. She's won one slam already. She's now defending for the first time. And her family situation seems good. Like, there's some famous toxic family relationships in tennis. Doesn't seem to be this way here. But how do you think that she can use this and grow as a player and become kind of like a legend in the game? Is that possible?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think what you've seen with her is each sort of step along the way has brought its own set of challenges. So coming out of the match we mentioned with Venus Williams at Wimbledon, well, then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, this is the next Serena. She's going to be the next dominant player. But, you sort of forget, all right, it's one match. She's 15. People have never seen her before, and indeed, she comes on to the tour as sort of a soft launch onto the WTA tour after that. And there are some struggles, because the reality is she's not Serena Williams. She's a totally different kind of player. She's got a totally different skill set. She's really not, in some ways, like the pure talent that Serena is. She's an incredible athlete, and Coco's been able to sort of use that athleticism at every step to kind of make up for some flaws that in her game technically. And yet along the way, she's also developed this great sense of, how to win ugly, how to win matches when conditions aren't perfect, when you're not playing very well. And we've seen that sort of manifest at every step along the way. Coming into the U.S. Open last year, the big challenge she had to deal with was that for the first time, she was really the favorite. And she had won D.C., she had won Cincinnati. She had clearly been playing the best tennis of anybody on the WTA tour on the hard courts coming into the U.S. Open, and everybody expects her to win. And she does. And that was a huge, huge step in her development. Well, okay, now what's the next challenge? The next challenge is, you're a Grand Slam champion. How do you become consistently, in finals, winning Grand Slams? And I think this is one that she's struggled with a little bit, and look, this year, maybe the whole narrative is different. If she beats Sabalenka in the Australian Open semis, which that match was just, on the knife's edge, and Coco really had opportunities in the second set to win it and to take control of that. And, it just didn't happen. But it was really the thinnest of margins. Maybe everything changes in her year if she does, and then she probably wins the Australian Open. But, she didn't. And I do think she struggled a little bit with the pressure of, all right, well now you've got to do it again. Now you've got to win on other surfaces. Now you've got to become this dominant player. Now you've got to live up to the fact that you're number two in the world when uh, really you're probably not as good right now as Sabalenka as Iga. So it's been interesting, and she's had a tough summer. I mean, I was there in Paris covering the match against Donna Vekic at the Olympics, and I don't think there's any way to spin it. That was a disappointing performance. It was a disappointing loss. Disappointments are going to happen, but I do think her attitude coming into the U.S. Open, I think has been positive. It's been good. And yeah, like if we're writing another chapter of Cocomania, I think what we would focus on is all right, you know, now there's a different set of eyeballs on her. Now she's this next level superstar, and yeah, another speed bump. But she's got a chance, the next couple of weeks of the U.S. Open to change that narrative too. We'll see if she can do it. I'm not counting on it because I just don't know if she's playing well enough. And long haul, she's going to have to evolve her game if she's going to win, 10, 12 majors. Because I still think there's some issues just on the court that plague her. Off the court, mentally, I think she's as good as it gets.
Yeah, they're all good points there. I think you said winning ugly, and in her team, I mean, famously is Brad
Yeah.
Gilbert, right? Like he's the master of taking a pretty poor technical game in himself. I would say, that he wasn't the most talented player and managed to learn how to win with good mental strength and good physical conditioning, right? And she's obviously more, I would say, more talented than Brad. He can be angry about this, but then. She has some flaws, and I think people have talked about the forehand not being as clean as it could be, for example. What would you say his role is in her team, and what could take her to the next level, also technically?
Well, you know what? I think what happened last year, so, and I write about this in the book as well. At Wimbledon, she loses in the first round to Sonia Kenin, and it's a big disappointment, really emotional low for her, probably in her whole career at that point, because again, she hadn't won the U.S. Open yet, and everyone's sort of wondering, all right, is she going to win a Grand Slam? And she's only 19 years old, but she's been around a while, and you're sort of looking for that big leap, that progress, and it's you're not quite seeing it, right? So she hires Brad Gilbert. They're paired up with Pariba as the coaching team. And I think what Brad did, uh, there's certainly going to be some technical things they work on behind the scenes that they never talk about, right? And that's just the way he rolls. But I think what he did, and because he's such a big public presence in the game and on ESPN and all that stuff, I think he's very aware that the things he says and the things he's asked about are all part of this picture as well. But I think the thing he does is gives confidence to say, all right, yeah, you've got these strengths and you've got these weaknesses. Well, a lot of coaches are going to try to fix your weakness, but we don't have time to fix your weakness, right? We got to go to the next tournament. We got a U.S. Open to win. So what we're going to do here is we're going to focus on how to make your strengths more pronounced. And we're going to do that through confidence, through understanding how to get to the shot in a point that you want to hit, and then also to understand that, tactically, I am going to help you as Brad Gilbert, this genius tactician, to manage a match. And that's what she did so beautifully at the U.S. Open last year. Is she managed matches, and I thought you saw it, certainly just in the first round against Sigmund, who was, playing tactically in a way that made her uncomfortable, and she found a way to manage the match to get to the shots that she wanted to hit, that she was comfortable hitting. And I thought all of that during that U.S. Open run was amazing, because the truth is she didn't play as well at the U.S. Open last year as she did, say, at Cincinnati or at D.C. She didn't play as well from match to match to match, but she managed everything tactically, emotionally, and just in the game flow, and hitting the right shots in a way that I thought really showed the Brad Gilbert effect, as it were. Now, obviously, there's going to be more challenges, and he is going to have to, if he's going to stay with this team, in my opinion, start to work on those flaws, those technical flaws, because over the long haul, I'm not sure if that forehand can be a 10-time winning Grand Slam winning forehand. But I just think the confidence and the tactics that he brings as a coach are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, they're for sure seems to work for a lot. I mean, he's worked with several like top players, and done really well. But obviously, there might be a ceiling technically. It's definitely hard to predict that. When it comes to like working on their game, like working Coco working on her game, do you think that there is like an issue with the schedule of tennis, right, in a year, the calendar year of like not having any time really to even rest? I mean, they have that 1 month, right, but that's like preseason pretty much for tennis players in December, to actually do some hardcore work on their game because they're obliged to play all these tournaments.
There's no doubt. Yeah, when you only have 6 weeks or so maximum as a training block to work on something before the next season, you're not going to be able to fix a forehand in 6 weeks. I think that's just impossible. And it may not even be possible in 6 months because that kind of thing, if you're talking about, changing grips, or dramatic changes that people have been playing with since the time they were 7 years old. That stuff is hard to change and maybe risky to change. And I do think there's a school of thought with any player, not just Coco, but with any player that, all right, if you've gotten to the point where you've won a Grand Slam and you've gotten to number two in the world, do you really need to make big fundamental changes to your forehand or to a stroke rather than, just small tweaks or, maybe, small footwork things that could probably be improved in 6 weeks more than, something as profound as a grip change. Um, so yeah, but I also think like Coco can win with her forehand that she has. She just has to, I think, trust it more, but also you gain that trust from understanding when you can go for it, and when you can't, and when you just sort of need to get the ball back in play and maybe get to your strength, which is the backhand. So to maybe be a little more strategic about it is a way around it. But yes, a short tennis off season, I don't think you're gonna quote fix a forehand without significantly bad results following for maybe even a year. And when tennis careers are short, I'm not sure that's advisable to do that.
That's true. I mean, it's like sometimes you have to really consider the risks of changing anything, right? Could be changing a racket, could be changing a string, could be changing. I mean, if you start losing confidence in tennis, it can be a very slippery slope downwards very quickly, And you've seen a lot of like one-hit wonders in tennis that win maybe one slam and then something happens, or like what happened to Thiem with his injury, and what happened after the U.S. Open when he maybe felt like he had done it all, or right. So things can snowball negatively as well, right? So when you look at Coco and her personality, she's seems like a strong person. She can stand up for stuff, and she seems to have been like raised in a very positive way. Uh, what do you think of her like star quality, and how do you think that plays a role into her game?
Yeah, look, I think that it's interesting because she's been in our lives for so long. 2019 is a pretty long time ago, and I think anybody who follows tennis has been aware of her since that time. Um, I don't think she has connected like a Serena, for instance, because she has not been as dominant. It's a different kind of. I think the thing people like about Coco so much is in some ways the struggle, right? The fact that she has had this transition from 15-year-old to star player with all these expectations, and you see in real time how it affects her. You see the ups and downs. You see, losses of confidence, and yet you also see these brilliant moments where Serena was just sort of straight dominance, for the most part. I mean, really, almost from the time she was, 18 years old. Uh, and yes, she had ups and downs too over the course of her career. Don't get me wrong, but she was collecting Grand Slam titles at a pretty good clip, and it was also with her sister there was a different element there. So uh, yeah, I think Coco is very marketable because people just like her, and they identify with her. But she doesn't maybe sort of yet have that, on another planet, on another, in another stratosphere sort of star quality that Serena had yet. But at the same time, she's, she's 20 years old and living in, sort of this Instagram society where, she puts out a lot of content about herself. And I think the cool thing about it with her that's just going to be different than athletes of the Serena generation, not just Serena, but any athlete in that generation, is we're going to sort of grow up with her and see everything along the way, whereas somebody like Serena just felt way more kind of inaccessible.
Yeah, the social media has changed a lot of things. Also for tennis players who get like messaged every day, and
Yeah.
they have to find a new way of dealing with that world, right?
And it's awesome though, because like, just as an example, like Barbara Krejcikova, before the Wimbledon final is on, X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, uh, answering questions from fans and like totally interacting with fans. And not everybody is going to be built to do that. Sometimes it's going to be, Taylor Fritz and his girlfriend, on, with these, very interesting and, lifestyles of the rich and famous kind of, Instagram stories, and like that's cool too. And so yeah, there's just going to be like a diversity and a variety of how players interact with fans and what they want to show to fans. But like Coco, what she seems to want to show to her fans is kind of like, yeah, this is like my real life. This is what it's like. And some of it's going to be really cool and glamorous, and some of it's going to be really mundane and boring, and some of it's going to be, I'm a 19-year-old girl, and this is what 19-year-old girls do. And so all of that stuff, I think, contributes to how people process and understand these athletes, and somebody like Coco specifically. And so yeah, it's fun. It's fun to watch. And I do remember, last year at the U.S. Open in her press conference, I think she had a great comment, which is, I see everything you guys say. I know all your usernames, which is not something, Pete Sampras would have said in 1999.
Yeah, you're far connected to the athletes and the stars and the actors, whatnot. When it comes to marketing, like, do you think WTA, ATP, now there's so many organizations. I mean, the Grand Slams are also one organization, and you have the ITF. Do you think we as a sport are doing a good job? Like, what could we improve? I mean, this is a big question, but like, there's usually a comparison to golf, where there's a lot of work with like, YouTubers playing with Tiger Woods or whatever, trying to grow the game. Are we doing the same type of things in tennis in the right way?
Needs to be way more of that. I know a lot of people had high hopes for the Netflix Breakpoint series, and that kind of fell flat. And really, it fell flat, I think, because it was it was not written and produced in a way that I thought was all that compelling. And frankly, I thought the players themselves were not that compelling. One of the biggest disappointments for me as a tennis fan is that, and I'm a golf fan too, but the Full Swing series on Netflix about the PGA Tour was way more interesting and engaging than Breakpoint, which it was a surprise and disappointment, because I think fundamentally tennis players are much more interesting people, and they come from much more interesting backgrounds than golfers. And yet that just wasn't ever conveyed in that series. Huge missed opportunity. I think the ATP does a good job with some of their like fun content when, when they go to a tournament, and, they have, Alex Demonar, dressed up as a parking lot attendant and undercover, and there's like a camera, and like people are like, wait, do I know who, is that who I think it is? Like, that kind of stuff is really funny and good. I don't know how much it breaks through to the non-tennis fans, but I think one of the biggest problems is access to the tournaments that outside of the Grand Slams. They're all on Tennis Channel in the United States, and I can't speak for Europe or anywhere else, but I just know in the U.S. Tennis Channel is kind of it's a niche channel. It's not on every cable system. Some people may not be able to find it, and I think not having any tennis presence on the big sports networks, on ESPN, or even on ABC, NBC, the regular networks, having zero tennis outside of the Grand Slams on those networks makes tennis hard to find, and I think it just falls off a lot of people's radars outside of really you know really about a month a year, because the Australian Open is hard because of the time zones being in the middle of the night. The French is kind of, I think, a little bit foreign, but everybody knows Wimbledon, everybody knows the U.S. Open. Those are easy to find on ESPN. Everything else is, I think, just for the average fan, just kind of disappears, and that's unfortunate.
It seems like the Grand Slams are like the things that everyone cares about, but the rest kind of falls in between somewhere. Even the Masters sometimes feel a bit flat,
Yeah,
especially after a slam. So I do agree that there's a disconnect of like the whole tennis ecosystem as you see it. And if you go to ATP 250s, you can see sometimes like empty seats all the way up into the semis, which you noted like in Atlanta. And I've seen it also in Europe, right?
yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that I think is going to be interesting to see how they manage in the future is the gambling aspect, because gambling is one area where frankly tennis has a big advantage over other sports, because tennis is on all day every day, pretty much. When I wake up in the morning and go down to my office, I flip on Tennis Channel almost any day of the week, and I'm watching something live. From it's Tuesday morning in Sofia, Bulgaria, and there's a APT 250, APT ATP 250 on. Like that's pretty much every week, right? And so that gives you, from a gambling standpoint, a huge opportunity to have this audience of people who uh, have live sports to bet on and watch, like literally all day, every day. And that's a potential driver of huge audiences. On the other hand, there's a lot of bad stuff that comes with gambling too, including the online harassment of players, which is terrible. So, like, I don't know how you balance all that, but that's, if we're talking about where a lot of the growth is going to be, frankly, it's probably there.
Yeah, you could see that. When it comes to like the ATP versus the WTA, what's your take there? Like, I have also feeling that the ATP media team is doing quite a good job right now. Like, at least with the funny social stuff, as you said, who knows whatever that brings. But it seems like they're a little bit on the ball. While I don't get the same feeling from the WTA as much.
I think the WTA is a big disappointment in that respect, and in terms of also just promoting their players and getting these personalities out there. I think there's some really great personalities on the WTA tour, and some really interesting stories, and I don't think they're being told in a and they're not being sold in a way that people. I think there's people who would be interested in a lot of this stuff, and you know, I realize that there's always some sensitivities when it comes to branding and stereotyping and whatever, but like somebody like Yelena Ostapenko, for instance, is sort of like a great villain character, for the WTA tour. And I'm not saying she's a villain. She's a very lovely person, right? But she on the court has a certain persona. She's kind of a foil, and she has an attitude, and she says crazy stuff, and and she wears these garish clothes, and she's like a big personality, right? Like she should be a big star because she's fun and she's cool, and yet you don't really see much from her out in just sort of the normal WTA spaces, right? She's just sort of like, oh yeah, she's just the 12th ranked player in the world. I think there could be a lot more done with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I also think it's sometimes on the players, but of course not
Sure.
everyone will embrace it. But it's like
Yep.
their marketability is quite important. You mentioned Breakpoint, and I agree with your point that like it felt like the accessibility of the players, like they were not really open as much as maybe
No.
they are in the golf. And even if you're more like reserved as a person, but if you open up and you say, hey, I'm counting every shot I hit since like I'm golf shot I hit since I was like 5 or 8,
Yeah.
like this British guy, it's a good sell. Like it creates a character, whether you like him or not, but it gives you some emotions, right, around this person. And same as you mentioned with Ostapenko, no matter what emotion she will give you, you will get an emotion, and you need people to bring emotions. And sometimes I feel like tennis shoots itself in the foot by not by kind of dampening all the emotions around the sport. Is that fair to
You're
say?
right. Yeah, you're right. And the players have to be on board with it. And I think sometimes though, just understanding the way sports organizations work, like that's also on the WTA to like literally when players first start playing WTA tour events, like literally when they arrive, you have to have a program to sit people down and to say, look, all right, you're going to be part of this tour. You're going to be playing these tournaments. Here's what we need from you to promote this sport, to promote these tournaments, to sell tickets. Because at the end of the day, I understand you may not initially be comfortable doing a lot of this stuff, but at the end of the day, it sells it sells the sport, which means you're going to make more money, and you're gonna you're gonna have more people in the stands, you're gonna have more marketing opportunities, and yeah, at the end of the day, you're going to make more money because the sport is more popular, and so you just have to sell people on making it all connected for them, and to do it right when they arrive, rather than okay, yeah, now you've won 3 Masters 1000s or whatever they're called, WTA 1000s. Now we need you to be doing stuff. Well, by that point, people have already sort of gotten comfortable in their routines and how they are. Like, like Rybakina, for instance, right? Elena Rybakina. There was a lot of conversation this year about how she wasn't very cooperative. She's not been very cooperative with the press. Well, all right, she only started to be in demand after she had won a bunch of tournaments, after she had won Wimbledon and gotten to number four. And so she doesn't want to break out of that shell because she's like, well, I've been successful doing it this way. So that's all opposite. You have to get the players to buy in before they become a big deal. And that's the way, when they do become a big deal, you kind of have this ready to go narrative that you can then sell, and they've already bought in on selling it.
Yeah. And some kind of media training, maybe from the organizations, like at
Yeah.
least from the top 100 players, like some kind of like to increase. Everybody wants to grow the sport, more money for everyone, more attention, more sponsors, more everything, right? So what do we need to do together as an organization to bring this to life, right? Then you need the players to be a little bit more media trained. Some will not be super comfortable, fine. Some will grow into that, and some will be supernatural. I mean, like Nick Kyrgios, he's built his brand around like Bad Boy Nick, and it's doing him well, right? Like I mean, he can say that it's been the opposite, but I would argue that he's one of the most marketable guys despite results. So that's really like how important that is, for any sport.
Yeah. When people say media training, I think sometimes they get the idea that the players or athletes are sort of being told what to say, or being told not to be controversial, or to not be themselves. And maybe there's some types of media training that are like that. That's not the kind of media training I think players need. I think the kind of media training they need is to be comfortable, just to be comfortable talking about themselves. It really comes down to that, right? To just be comfortable talking about their background, about who they are, about the things they're interested in, about, to be comfortable just projecting as a human being rather than a tennis robot. And that seems to be the biggest struggle that a lot of players had, both on the men's and women's tour.
Yeah, it's really embracing yourself. So it's like probably has some like good aspects for your regular life as well. Like if you're learning to embrace yourself, should be probably be good, but they need to kind of understand that from like opening up to a certain aspect towards people so they can know who they are and like them for it. I think that is quite important for anyone, but for a professional athlete even more.
The thing is, this sport is really hard. It's really hard to make it, really hard. And it's sometimes really lonely, and it can mess with your head and all that stuff, right? And these are all things that actually are compelling about these athletes. And yet those are the parts of the job that sometimes they are least interested in talking about. And that's sort of the fundamental tension here of trying to get them to open up.
Yeah. When it comes to, I mean, now you're press, I guess, at the US Open, right?
Yep.
What do you feel like the reception of like having press credentials, being a part of the media? Is that like an easy job at the events? Is it really dependent on the event? Are players like generally easygoing, or is it a tricky job, like where a lot of kind of access or management from the different organizations trying to kind of steer the questions where they want them and so on?
Well, I think at the Grand Slams, especially for somebody like me, I don't cover tennis on a regular basis. I'll show up at the U.S. Open, I'll cover the Olympics. I'll write a few stories throughout the year here and there, but I'm not part of the tennis press. So for me, it's fairly easy. I kind of know what the boundaries are, and I'm realistic about, all right, for USA Today, what our audience wants is going to be different maybe than what the person who's watching the tennis from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day. So I focus less on the minutia. I focus more on the big picture and the big stories and the big stars, and that's fairly easy. The access is pretty good. Like if you have a specialty story that you want to write and you want to do some one-on-one interviews as a member of the press, like they have a system to request those, and often they'll accommodate. The player will accommodate depending on the player and the situation. So that part is great. But especially covering the early part of a Grand Slam, it's a mad rush to find the stories, and there's so many matches happening at once, and you kind of got to decide, all right, am I going to go out to this outside court to get a sense of the atmosphere and to watch it up close, or am I going to stay in the press room and watch four matches at once because they're all really interesting, and then you've got to hustle back to a press conference when a player is coming in after a big match that you need to talk to. So there's no real strategy to it. Every day is just kind of like, all right, I'm going to try to do these four or five things, and I may do two or three, and I may do something I didn't think about because there was a crazy result. So for me at least, it's a lot of fun. I wouldn't say it's hard, but it's like a little bit of a logistics challenge.
Yeah, it always is. I've been to several tournaments. It's always fun, and it's a lot of running around, and you get kind of some tennis fatigue after a long day of watching a lot of tennis. So when it comes to the predictions, then, like what do you think of Coco's chances? We start with the WTA. What are your thoughts about who's going to win?
Yeah, I mean Coco has a chance, I think, to settle into the tournament. I thought she played well on Monday in the first round. I think there are some tough matches. Like she could be in the third round. I think she would have Svitolina, which I think is a
Yep.
tough match, for her in the third round. So that's one I think I'll be keyed in on for sure. Um, I think Sabalenka is probably the favorite on the women's side based on how she played in Cincinnati and if she's carrying that form over here. Also, like she has really, sniffed around the U.S. Open title a few times, including last year when she lost to Coco in the final and had the lead in that match and then kind of just lost. I thought, frankly, just lost patience with the way Coco was playing her. Um, it just sort of lines up that maybe this is her year. But if it's not, if she stubs her toe somewhere, I think you could go 15 deep in the women's draw, and I wouldn't be surprised with 15 or 16 of these women uh, coming home with the title. So I think because I think I just don't trust Iga on in this environment to win. I know she's won the U.S. Open before, but I just don't necessarily trust her in these conditions on this court. Um, Coco, like I said, played well in the first round, but need to see more consistency of that because she had not played well coming into this tournament. Uh, Rybakina split with her coach, and she's had a kind of injury-filled, weird year. So then after that, like, Jasmine Paolini's made a couple slam finals this year. Maybe she continues that run. Um, Naomi Osaka's playing today, but probably by the time people hear this, we'll already know her versus Ostapenko. But the winner of that match, it's a first round match, but the winner of that match could really go far in this draw. Yeah, I don't know how to handicap the women outside of Sabalenka.
No, it's a tough one. Yeah, she's my favorite as well. I think to the title. As you said, like, I mean, when you see Iga on clay, it's like a different player. But in this kind of like, not everyone vibes with the crowd in New York, right? Like, it can be quite tough for some players who are maybe more introverted and don't really soak up the atmosphere as much. And I think she seems to struggle a bit more, than maybe Sabalenka and Coco for sure. Being an American player. And on the men's side, do you have any favorites there? What's your thoughts?
Well, on the men's side, I came into the tournament sort of wondering what was going to happen because all right, Novak coming off the gold medal in Paris. I don't really know what he's been doing since then. It seems like he's been
Party.
doing a lot of partying. Yeah, as I'm saying, like it seems like they've been doing a lot of partying in Serbia, and he's been basking in the glory of that win. And so, like, does he come in to the tournament, not quite as fit as he needs to be? Is he kind of fat and happy with his year because he won the gold medal? I didn't think he played great in the first round, uh, but obviously, I no need to read too much into that. But so I think he's a bit of a wild card. Same with Carlos, to be honest, because he only played one match since the Olympics, and it wasn't a very good one. So, where's he at right now? I would sort of trust that he'll be good as the tournament goes along, but at the same time, like, you know, how much does he have left in the tank after winning the French, after winning Wimbledon, getting to the final and losing in Paris? And then Sinner, like, how does he process all the stuff that's gone on around him with the doping? So I think I mean, obviously, like, I would expect the winner to come from those three, but all three have some real question marks. And then if it's not one of those three, just throw up your hands, right?
Yeah, it's an open one. Like, to be honest, like it feels like everybody has some kind of question mark around them. Sometimes people go in and be like, okay, no, who's going to beat Sinner, or who's going to beat Alcaraz, who's going to beat Joker, right? But this one feels like there's a question mark on every top three player in the main men's draw, and then the rest is I mean, I guess, like you said, it's a completely open tournament. So what happens for you now? Cocomania, you can get it from like Amazon and everywhere. But what's next? You're
Yes.
going to write another book? What's the
Yeah,
plan?
we'll see. Yeah, I mean, if anyone out there wants to present me with an opportunity to write a book, I'll listen. But I have a couple ideas more on topics outside of tennis, but um, it'll take a while for those sort of to develop. Really, what's next for me? I'll be covering the U.S. Open, and then uh, really digging into the college football season, and that'll take over my life pretty much in the United States until January.
Exciting time, right? And you will keep on playing when you're back from your injury, right?
I'm just chomping at the bit to get back on the court, which I expect to start hitting a few balls because yeah, my ankle's feeling good, it's feeling healthy, so I'm gonna get back on the court, start hitting a few balls, and work my way back into to playing some matches because I've certainly missed it the last 3 months.
Last but not least, a nerdy question: what's your racket and string of choice?
Yeah, yeah. So actually, this spring I made a racket switch. I'd been playing the Pure Strike 18 by 20, the closed string pattern, and I love that racket. I decided to change it up a little bit and go with something it's a little bit different weight balance uh, to maybe help me generate just a little bit more power. So I actually switched over to the Technofiber Teeth Bite 305. That's the racket I've been playing with this summer before my injury, and I'm still experimenting actually with the strings, and that's something I do frequently. Um, I started with the Razor Code, which is a good poly, but I then went to the multi-filaments. I started experimenting with some multi-filaments, and it's a little bit like a drug addiction, unfortunately, in the sense that the feeling of playing with some of those multi-filaments is amazing. But the problem is I can only play with the string bed for about a week and a half, and I don't know how to string my own rackets, and maybe I need to learn how to do that. But replacing a string bed every week and a half gets a little expensive. So I'm either going to need to have less expensive tastes in strings, or start to learn how to do it myself. I may need to make an investment in that because especially as you get older, when you get to be my age, that elbow, the load on the wrist and the elbow with the poly, it I can start to feel it a little bit.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Like, I mean, some multis are pretty control oriented. Like, if you go from a tech fiber like a Triax, which is like a
Yeah,
hybrid multi poly, you
yeah,
can get really good control with that one.
yeah. Actually, I think I'd have to look it up in the computer, but I think Triax was the last one I had before I got hurt. Yeah, I have loved playing with all the Technofiber products. I'm not trying to be a company shill or anything like that. They don't sponsor me, but the Technofiber rackets and strings I think are tremendous.
Yeah, they're good. They're very good. Now they have a new TF40. I'm gonna test that soon, so that's next on the list. But that sounds like a good setup. Like it has similarities to the Pure Strike and pretty beefy swing weight, so you're gonna get some good
Yep,
power, but still control from
exactly.
like 18, 19 string pattern that you have. Like so, I
Yep.
think sounds solid. But finding a string can be a lifelong journey. So hopefully you don't have to waste that much time on it.
That's something not enough recreational players pay attention to is the strings, and
Yeah.
they don't know much about it. They don't research it. They just sort of hand it to the pro and say, "Hey, give me whatever." But it really does affect the way you play, and it really affects actually how your arm feels.
Yeah, the tension is super important. Like, I mean,
Yep.
some players on the pro tour play with like 35 pounds, 25 pounds if you go to Manarino or lower. And then you have
Yep.
guys like 60 pounds, like the Sinner is
Yeah.
62 pounds, So
Yeah.
it makes a
I'm
big difference.
playing about. Yeah, I'm playing usually maybe about 45 in the summer,
That's good.
and then I'll you know I'll mess with it a little bit depending on the weather, but yeah, 45 to 47 is kind of the range where I like to live. I've tried, the 50s, and that's fine too. But I don't feel like I lose a lot of control in the 40s, so so I've kind of learned to live in that range.
I think that's a good range. I think you see a lot of pros going down to that range as well, So I
Yeah,
think it makes sense.
as long as you can keep
And
the
more,
control. Yeah,
yeah. As long as you have the racket speed for it, you can control the ball.
yeah,
But I think too many rec players are up in the 50s, even high 50s sometimes, and that ruins many elbows, around there. So
yep,
it's not so good.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I always tell people if you don't maintain that racket speed, that's when the control, and that I think that's actually the biggest problem with most recreational players, most amateurs, is not understanding that yeah, you've got to hit out on the ball with these modern rackets because that's what they're meant for.
Yeah, exactly. Go for it. All right, man. Dan, I really appreciate you. Nice talking to you. Great book. I read it before this, and I really liked. I didn't know too much about Coco before. I did know some of the stories, of course, but it was really like eye opening in some way. And I think there's some learnings in there as well, like family relationships and stuff that people can take. So check it out wherever books are sold, I guess. And I will put a link in the description and the show notes. So I wish you a great day now in the U.S. Open, and I hope to talk to you again at some point.
Thanks, Jonas. Anytime. I really enjoyed it.